Yesterday was the last normal day for me and probably millions, if not billions, of people. I never imagined everything would turn upside down, rendering our conveniences useless. Phones, computers, nice apartments, cars, food, all the blessings of civilization would become unnecessary. No one knew this would happen or managed to prepare. Let me start from the beginning. I'm writing this on the last pages of a notebook for the next generation, hoping they learn about the horrors that occurred. I'm Jack, 30 years old. I had a family, 2 kids, and a nearly paid-off mortgage on an apartment in a good complex. I lived in a small town near the Canadian border in Michigan. Life was typical: home, work, kids, until one horrible moment. On that last day, we were eating chips and watching TV as a family. Unable to find a decent show, we put on the news as background noise. I was chatting with my family when an emergency broadcast interrupted. My wife turned up the volume. I couldn't believe what I heard, but I shouldn't have doubted it. Satellites recorded explosions near the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. Then came reports of accidents at missile silos in Russia. Major industrial accidents were reported at several U.S. power plants. It was just past 9 p.m. The news anchor nervously discussed terrorism, earthquakes, and nuclear catastrophes. I looked at my stunned wife and confused children, my mind racing. The news reported that the remaining reactors at 3 Mile Island had exploded. More accidents were reported in London and Paris. I didn't want to believe it, but footage of panicking people, fires, hazmat suits, and military personnel made it real. I hoped it wouldn't reach us. Looking out the window, everything seemed normal. Cars driving, people walking and laughing. This calmed me slightly. I told my family, "Let's go to bed. We'll figure things out tomorrow. Hopefully this isn't some worldwide nuclear disaster." My wife just shrugged, clearly scared. The kids kept playing, oblivious. After putting them to bed, my wife and I lay down but couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was chaotic, but I still hoped for the best, thinking authorities would evacuate or help us if needed. We finally fell asleep after about 40 minutes. In the middle of the night, my phone started ringing and receiving texts. Half asleep, I turned it off and put it under my pillow. How I regretted that. In the morning, I checked my phone to find about 10 messages from emergency services. Nuclear alert. Gather necessities. Prepare for evacuation. Realizing the gravity of the situation, anxiety overwhelmed me. My first thought was protecting my kids and wife. I woke my wife saying, "Get up quickly. We need to pack. Something terrible has happened. Get the kids and necessities. Evacuation should start in half an hour." She soon understood, gathering the kids with tears in her eyes. We packed documents, money, food, and water, then waited on the couch. I watched out the window while my wife tried the TV, but nothing worked despite having electricity. Outside was gloomy and overcast, with no sun visible through the eerie black clouds or smoke. People gathered in the town center with bags and suitcases. We waited, but no one came. After 2 hours, people started breaking into cars and leaving. Panic set in when I tasted metal in my mouth. We needed to leave or hide in a basement, but I knew an invisible enemy radiation was coming. I told my family to wrap themselves in towels and put on masks. We left our home and saw a horrifying scene in the town center. People vomiting blood, convulsing, and suffocating. I couldn't bear it. We jumped into an old Ford I found. I knocked out the owner who was coughing up blood, took his keys, and we drove off. The black clouds thickened as we left town. I stopped at a supermarket to grab supplies, seeing more suffering people inside. Driving towards the town exit, I wondered how this happened so quickly and who was responsible. We drove in silence, noticing dead birds everywhere. As we left town, I felt weaker and stopped the car. The air seemed cleaner. I checked the news on my phone. More explosions, fleeing people, millions dead. I searched for radiation remedies online, regretting not getting medicines earlier. My son Sam's condition worsened. He was coughing more. We stopped again, and my wife comforted him in the back seat. Our older son Mike seemed fine. I felt dizzy but kept going. The road seemed endless as we drove further from town, encountering fewer cars. Weakness overcame me again. I stopped in a forested area where the air felt cleaner. The horrifying news continued. More explosions, chaos, death. Hopelessness set in as I wondered what to do and where to go. Sam's coughing worsened, each time stabbing my heart. If anything happened to him, I wouldn't survive it. We continued driving, unsure of our destination but hoping for safety. As we drove deeper into the forest, the roads became less crowded. The eerie silence was broken only by the hum of our engine and Sam's occasional coughing. I tried to focus on driving, but my mind kept racing. What was happening in other parts of the country? Were there any safe places left? We passed abandoned gas stations and small towns that looked deserted. I was torn between stopping to search for supplies and pressing on to find help for Sam. My wife, Sarah, kept checking on the boys in the back seat. Mike was quiet, probably scared but trying to be brave for his little brother. After a few hours of driving, we came across a small cabin in a clearing. It looked abandoned but intact. I decided to stop and check it out. We needed a place to rest and regroup. "Stay in the car," I told Sarah. "I'll make sure it's safe." The cabin was dusty but seemed untouched by the chaos we'd left behind. I found some canned food and bottled water inside. It wasn't much, but it was something. I signaled for my family to join me. As we settled in, I tried to get the old radio working. Through the static, we caught fragments of emergency broadcasts. The situation was dire everywhere. Major cities had been hit hard. The government was urging people to stay indoors and await further instructions. Sarah tended to Sam, who was getting worse. His cough was more frequent, and he was running a fever. I felt helpless, wishing I had some medicine or knew what to do. Mike helped by fetching water and trying to comfort his brother. That night, as the kids slept fitfully, Sarah and I talked in whispers. "What are we going to do, Jack?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we'll figure it out. We have to." The next morning, I decided to explore the area around the cabin. I found a small stream nearby. At least we'd have fresh water. As I was filling some containers, I heard a noise. Turning quickly, I saw a deer watching me cautiously. It was the first living animal I'd seen since we left town. Somehow it gave me a glimmer of hope. Back at the cabin, Sam seemed a bit better. The clean air was probably helping. We decided to stay put for a few days, hoping things would stabilize. I made short trips to scavenge for supplies in nearby abandoned houses and cars. On one of these trips, I found an old CB radio in a truck. It took some tinkering, but I got it working. We started listening for any broadcasts, any signs of organized help or other survivors. Days passed. We settled into a routine, always alert for any changes or threats. The isolation was getting to us, but it felt safer than venturing out into the unknown. One evening, as I was adjusting the CB radio, a voice crackled through. "Is anyone out there? This is Dr. Thompson at Clearwater Research Facility. We have supplies and medical assistance. If you can hear this, we're located." I quickly wrote down the coordinates. It wasn't too far from us, maybe a day's drive. We had a decision to make. Stay in our relatively safe cabin or risk the journey for the promise of help and medicine for Sam. Sarah and I discussed it long into the night. The thought of proper medical care for Sam was tempting, but the dangers of the journey were real. In the end, we decided we had to try. We couldn't just sit and wait any longer. The next morning, we packed up our meager supplies and loaded the car. As we pulled away from the cabin, our temporary sanctuary, I felt a mix of hope and fear. What would we find at this research facility? Would it be the help we needed or another disappointment? The road ahead was uncertain, but we were together. Whatever happened, we'd face it as a family. As we drove, I glanced at Sarah and the boys in the rearview mirror. No matter what this new world threw at us, I knew we'd do whatever it took to survive. As we drove towards the Clearwater Research Facility, the landscape changed. The dense forest gradually gave way to open fields and scattered farmhouses. Most looked abandoned, but occasionally we'd see smoke rising from a chimney. It was both comforting and unsettling to know others had survived. Our old Ford struggled on some of the rougher roads. I worried about breaking down in the middle of nowhere, but we had no choice but to press on. Sam's condition wasn't improving, and we were running low on supplies. Around midday, we came across a small town. Unlike the others we'd passed, this one showed signs of life. A makeshift barricade blocked the main street, and I could see people moving about. As we approached, a man with a rifle stepped out. "Stop right there!" he shouted. I brought the car to a halt, hands visible on the steering wheel. "We're just passing through," I called out. "We're looking for the Clearwater Research Facility. My son needs medical help." The man lowered his rifle slightly. "Clearwater?" "Yeah. We've heard their broadcasts. It's about 50 miles north of here." He paused, studying us. "You folks look like you could use a meal and some rest. We've got a community here trying to rebuild. You're welcome to stay the night if you want." I looked at Sarah, who nodded cautiously. We were tired and hungry, and a safe place to sleep sounded too good to pass up. The town, which we learned was called Millbrook, had organized itself remarkably well. They had a communal dining area, patrols, and even a small clinic. The doctor there couldn't do much for Sam, but she gave us some medicine to help with his symptoms. That night, as we rested in a small room they'd given us, Sarah and I talked about staying. It was tempting, the safety in numbers, the sense of community. But we both knew Sam needed more help than they could provide here. In the morning, the townspeople generously resupplied us for our journey. As we were about to leave, an older man approached us. "I used to work at Clearwater," he said. "It's a good place, but be careful. In times like these, even the best intentions can go wrong." His cryptic warning stayed with me as we drove north. The roads became increasingly challenging, with abandoned vehicles and debris forcing us to take detours. By late afternoon, we finally saw a sign for Clearwater. The facility was impressive, a large complex surrounded by high fences. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. As we approached the gate, a voice came over a loudspeaker. "Please state your business." "We heard your broadcast," I called out. "We have a sick child who needs medical attention." There was a pause. Then the gate slowly opened. As we drove in, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The place seemed too orderly, too untouched by the chaos outside. We were met by a team in hazmat suits who quickly ushered us into a decontamination area. They separated us, taking Sam to what they called their medical wing. Sarah was reluctant to let him go, but we didn't have much choice. Over the next few days, we were poked, prodded, and questioned. They seemed particularly interested in our journey and any radiation symptoms we'd experienced. Sam was improving under their care, but we were only allowed to see him for short periods. I started to notice things that didn't add up. The facility had more military personnel than seemed necessary. I overheard conversations about test subjects and controlled exposure. The old man's warning echoed in my mind. One night, I snuck out of our room to do some exploring. In a restricted area, I found documents detailing experiments on radiation resistance in humans. With growing horror, I realized we might have walked into something far more sinister than we'd imagined. I rushed back to our room, woke Sarah, and quickly explained what I'd found. We had to get out of there, and fast. But first, we needed to rescue Sam. As alarms began to blare, signaling they'd discovered my intrusion, we put our hastily made plan into action. We had to move quickly, outsmart the guards, and somehow find our way to Sam in the medical wing. Our escape from Clearwater would push us to our limits, testing everything we'd learned about survival in this new, dangerous world. But we were determined. Whatever it took, we would save our son and find a truly safe place, if one still existed. The alarms blared through the facility as Sarah and I raced down the sterile corridors. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. We had to find Sam and get out of here before they caught us. "This way," I whispered urgently, pulling Sarah towards the medical wing. We'd memorized the layout as best we could during our supervised visits to see Sam. Now that knowledge was our lifeline. As we rounded a corner, we nearly collided with two guards. Without thinking, I tackled one while Sarah, surprising even herself, delivered a swift kick to the other's knee. We didn't wait to see if they'd stay down, just kept running. The medical wing was eerily quiet compared to the chaos in the rest of the facility. We found Sam's room and burst in, startling a nurse who was checking his vitals. "Mom, Dad," Sam cried out, his face lighting up despite his weakness. "We're getting out of here, buddy," I said, scooping him up into my arms. He felt lighter than I remembered, and I tried not to think about what they might have done to him. Sarah grabbed a nearby wheelchair and some medical supplies. "We might need these," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As we exited the room, we ran into Dr. Thompson, the man whose voice we'd heard on the radio. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, blocking our path. "We're trying to save humanity here. The experiments, the tests, they're all necessary." "Necessary?" Sarah spat. "You're experimenting on children?" I shifted Sam in my arms, ready to push past the doctor if needed, but suddenly Mike appeared behind Dr. Thompson, wielding a fire extinguisher he'd pulled from the wall. "Leave my family alone!" he shouted, spraying the doctor with foam. In the confusion, we rushed past, Mike joining our escape. The journey through the facility was a blur of alarms, shouts, and near misses. Somehow, we made it to the garage where they kept emergency vehicles. I hot-wired a sturdy-looking SUV while Sarah got the boys inside. As we crashed through the closing gate, bullets pinged off the vehicle's body. I floored the accelerator, and soon the facility disappeared behind us. We drove for hours, switching to back roads and changing directions randomly to throw off any pursuit. As dawn broke, we finally felt safe enough to stop and assess our situation. Sam was sleeping, his breathing easier than it had been in days. Whatever they'd done at the facility, it seemed to have helped his condition, at least temporarily. Mike was quiet, still processing the night's events. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We keep moving. Find somewhere safe, if such a place exists anymore." And so began our new life on the road. We became nomads, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere too long. The world had changed dramatically in the weeks since the nuclear disasters. Some areas were complete wastelands, while others had formed small, often hostile communities. We learned to scavenge, to hunt, to fix things that broke. Mike grew up fast, becoming an expert at finding safe water sources and edible plants. Sam's health improved slowly but steadily. Whatever Clearwater had done to him seemed to have increased his resistance to radiation. Months passed, then years. We heard rumors of other facilities like Clearwater, of government bunkers where the elite had retreated. But we stayed away from anything that smelled of authority or control. Instead, we found our own path. We discovered a network of other survivors, people who shared information and resources without trying to dominate each other. Through this network, we learned of a place in the mountains, far from any former population centers, where a community was thriving. It took us nearly 2 years to reach it, facing countless challenges along the way. We lost the SUV to a horde of desperate people early on, traveled on foot and by bicycle, even spent a terrifying month on a makeshift raft floating down a river. But finally, we arrived at Haven, as the community called itself. It was everything we'd hoped for and more. Solar and wind power, sustainable agriculture, a school for the kids, and most importantly, no experiments or authoritarian control. We were welcomed warmly, our skills and experiences valued. For the first time since that fateful day when the world changed, we felt like we could breathe easy. Years passed. Sam grew into a strong young man, his early illness nothing but a distant memory. Mike became one of Haven's best scouts, mapping the surrounding areas and making contact with other survivor communities. Sarah and I found our places too. She worked in Haven's clinic, using the medical knowledge she'd picked up during our years on the road. I helped with security and infrastructure, always working to make our home safer and more sustainable. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our small but comfortable house, watching the sun set over the mountains, Sarah turned to me. Do you ever think about what caused it all? She asked. The explosions, the accidents? Was it really an accident? I shook my head. I don't know. Maybe someday we'll find out. But for now, I'm just grateful we're here, together. She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. Me too. As twilight deepened into night, I reflected on our journey. The world had ended, or at least the world as we knew it. But humanity had survived. We'd adapted, learned, grown. And here, in this small community nestled in the mountains, we were building something new. The future was still uncertain. We knew there were dangers out there, hostile groups, environmental challenges, the ever-present threat of radiation in some areas. But we faced it all together, not just as a family, but as part of a larger community. I thought about the notebook I'd started writing in at the beginning of all this. It was full now, stored safely in our home. Maybe someday, when things were more stable, I'd share our story with the younger generation. They needed to know where we came from, what we'd been through, to appreciate the peace and stability we'd found here. As the first stars appeared in the sky, I made a silent promise to myself and to the memory of all those who hadn't made it this far. We would keep building, keep improving, keep striving for a better world. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. The world had ended, yes, but here we were, still standing, still fighting, still hoping, and in the end, that's what truly mattered. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Whatever challenges the future held, we would face them together, stronger for all we'd endured. As I looked at Sarah, then through the window at our sleeping sons, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had lost so much, but we had gained something too, a deeper appreciation for life, for family, for community. In this new world, we had found not just survival, but a chance to truly live. The night deepened around us, but I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. We had found our light, our hope, our haven, and no matter what came next, we would face it as we had faced everything else. Together, one day at a time, always moving forward.